Hi all, welcome back to my channel. My name is Amira and today I have for you my Pat McGrath, or rather my updated Pat McGrath Mothership ranking. Okay, so I originally did a ranking of literally every Pat McGrath palette that I owned at the time on my blog, which I will leave a link to that post down below, and that was a few years ago, and that was really when I was just getting into purchasing Mothership palettes. At that point I was only purchasing like her 6-pan minis, so that was my introduction to Pat McGrath eyeshadows. And so the ranking has changed quite a bit because I now own 8 out of the 9 Motherships. I do not own the newest one, Utopian Dreams. I opted to skip that one. It just wasn't speaking to me, and I'm trying to get out of the habit that I have when it comes to Pat McGrath, which is that I am a bit of a completionist, especially when it comes to Motherships now. Once you start buying them, they become very easy to keep purchasing. And at their price tag, that can be a bit problematic. So I decided, you know, do you really want that palette? Does that color story speak to you? It did not. So I was like, you know, I'm gonna close the purse, you know? So let's start off with number 8 in my rankings. That is Mothership, I think this is 2, Mothership 2 Subversive. And she looks like this. I took all of mine out of their boxes. The boxes are sitting over here like in a stack, but I keep all of my boxes. I keep all of my palettes in their boxes because they're so beautiful and I can't throw them away. And it's nice to see them all lined up. And because all the packaging is pretty identical, it makes it very easy for me to reach for whichever one I want to use that particular day. So yeah, so this is what it looks like. And I don't know if you can tell, but this is completely unused. It is actually the newest addition to my collection. I purchased it during her last, I think, 30% off sale. Of all of the palettes that I own of Pat McGrath, the reason why this is my least favorite is because this was the color story that I was the least attracted to. Why did I purchase it? Because like I said, I have a problem with being a completionist when it comes to Pat McGrath, and I'm working my way through it. I'm having conversations with myself. But this was the last item I purchased, and this is kind of, or the last Mothership that I purchased, and this is the one that kind of made me go, okay, did you really need that? No. Did you really want that? Meh, not really. So I think it's pretty. It's not my favorite color story. For me, there are shades in here, again, that are like just, they're pretty, but they're not, I'm do this so I don't blind you. They're not my jam overall. So yeah, this is why this is number 8. It's just, it's my least favorite color story, and I haven't even touched it. So, you know. Number 2 is, and people are going to be surprised by this, and I think there are going to be people who are going to be angry with me for this. And I'm sorry, I'm just going to say it, okay? I think this palette's color story, while pretty, is overrated. I purchased this one because everyone was raving about it. I purchased it because there are shades in this palette. I'm keeping the suspense up, I know. There are shades in this palette that I love. That I dip into, that I reach for, that I think about, I should use that shade, that shade is delicious. But overall, as a color story, for me, it's just not that exciting. And that is on Seduction. Don't be mad, I'm sorry, but this is how I feel. Again, I think that there are shades in here that are beautiful and that I love. I mean, this red, I'm a sucker for red. I'm a sucker for red metallic. I mean, this red, I don't know if you guys can see that because my camera once again does not want to focus. We're having issues. We're going into counseling, trying to work it out. But this shade, and then this shade here that I am obsessed with, and I'm just going to swatch the ones that I love so you guys know for a fact. These are the shades that I reach for in this palette. This is what I reach for. I don't know if you can see them, but this is it. This is it. This bronzy shade, this red, this beautiful greeny gold topper shade, this type of shade. These are 3 out of the 4 special shades in this palette. That's it. And this is a metallic, and those are the shades that I love out of this palette. I mean, the other ones are pretty, but again, because Pat loves her golds and her browns, they're not that unique. Like, I don't find the other shades in the palette to be that interesting. But yeah, I don't know, guys. It doesn't make my heart sing the way other palettes do. I don't think it's a bad palette. I know it's so many people's favorite palette, and I know that ranking is going to be so controversial, but that's how I feel. Number 3, Sublime. This is another one that I originally was like, I don't think I want that. I don't think I need it. You know, even though it has green in it, which is my absolute favorite color in the entire world. Green is like my jam. I was like, you know, no. That was what I was saying at that. I was just like, you know, no, I don't need it. But it's one of those, you know how you have palettes that you keep seeing them, and the more you see them, the more they grow on you until finally it just comes out to be a full-blown obsession and you need it in your life. That's kind of what happened with this one. Like, I kept looking at it and going, I don't need it. I don't need it. Well, it's kind of pretty, but I don't need it. I should get it. That was literally my thought process with this palette, and so I purchased it. It's beautiful. Again, I would say this palette is for me a dip into palette. And I will say this, I have a lot of palettes like that where I love the colors in the palette. I don't necessarily love them all together collectively to create a look. I'll dip in and use other palettes. I love combining palettes together to create a look. So that's kind of how I use this one. Similar to how I use Bronze Seduction, but I like this one more overall, if that makes sense. Number 5 is a palette that I know there was a huge love for last spring and summer, and I was definitely one of those people. I was up bright and early with my hands ready to purchase this because the packaging, the limited edition packaging, was so chef's kiss. And that is Divine Rose 2. And that is number 5 in my ranking. Here she is. So pretty. I used this a ton when I first got it. I used it pretty much every day. If I was doing my eye makeup, I was using this palette. And I was pairing it with the Give Me Glow Cosmetics Vintage Rose palette, which for me has the perfect rose color story. And that deep, rich, vibrant green that is in that palette pairs so well with the very famous Sextraterrestrial. This multi-chrome that just like shifts from purple to pink to green. Those two pair together, that really vibrant green, and then this multi-chrome, stunning. But I will say I don't reach for it as much as I used to. I feel like for me, as far as her collection of palettes, it really is sort of like smack dab in the middle as far as how attracted to the color story I am. 4 in the ranking is actually the very first full-size Mothership I ever purchased. I had been purchasing 6 pans and her quads, and I was buying everything but Motherships because for some reason I just couldn't pull the trigger, and I also didn't have at that point, there were none of her Motherships, the color story didn't speak to me enough for me to feel motivated to spend that kind of money. So I was just holding out. I was like, okay, I really want to try them, but it has to be a color story where I feel like the entire palette is something that I will get use out of. And so I was like, I was playing it safe. I was like, it has to be something that's everyday wear. That palette for me was Divine Rose 1. Now, I purchased this palette twice. I purchased it when it first came out in her, black, classic black and gold packaging, and I used it a ton. And then last spring, summer time, I think it was like May when she came out with Divine Rose 2. that came out in the limited edition packaging, which I just showed. She came out with limited edition packaging for Divine Rose 1. And that is the packaging that I needed to have in my life. So I have it in the pink packaging, the solid pink packaging. And so this one, if you look at it, doesn't look as used. It looks a little bit newer. It's because the original one that I had, I used a ton, but I wound up actually selling that on Poshmark and keeping this one because I love the packaging so much. But getting to the actual palette itself, this is just such a beautiful, beautiful color story. Anyone who asks me about Pat McGrath Motherships, I always say, you know, if they're like, what should I buy? I'm really nervous. Like, I need to find one that I really love. What do you think is one that I would get the most use out of? I always say this one. I always say this one because it's a beautiful palette, and it's a really easy to use palette. It's a really wearable palette. I feel like this is a palette for someone who wants to try Pat McGrath but is a little too afraid of her other color stories, for people who love cool tones, people who are looking for that Pat McGrath palette that will pay back in dividends as far as usage goes and something that they can use every single day. This is the one, folks. This is the one. And it still has special shades in it. It still has, you know, things that make it just as beautiful as, you know, the other palettes. And I'll swatch some of these, or all of them actually. I'll swatch all 4 of the special shades. I don't know if you guys can see these. They're all very light in tone, these special shades. I would say 2 of them are very kind of metallic-y, specifically this one. And I'm going to just see if I can swatch it and maybe that'll... I don't know if you guys can see that, but as the shift, oh, it's so pretty. That shift is so pretty. Please stop tracking my face, track my hand. Thank you. How beautiful that is. That one is probably my favorite. And then there's this one, and this one is actually a repeat shade. She originally had this in this one here. I don't know if you can see that pink shift. This is actually one of her highlighter shades. It was actually in the highlighter trio, like her classic powder highlighter trio that she first came out with. It's actually a repeat of that pinky shade that she just made into an eyeshadow. So this actually functions really well. You can use it as an eyeshadow, and you can use it as a highlighter. For me, my personal favorite shades in this are actually not the special shades. It's actually the satiny metallics and one of the mattes. And this shade here, I'll make sure I get all the, called Veloria. So pretty. This one here, and I'm wipe my hand out, so hopefully there's no glitter. It's just like this beautiful, cool toned, purpley mauve shade. And then the other 2 shades that I really love in this palette are these 2 shades. This one is kind of like purpley, and this one's like a bronzy brown. These are the shades that I reached for the most when I use this palette. So I got sprinkly freckles everywhere, but it's just such a usable palette. I will say, because this was the first one and I've since purchased other ones, it's still high on the list. It's just not as high as it used to be. I think in my original ranking, I had this as like number 2, I think, maybe number 3. So it's dropped down 1 or 2 spots, but it's still very much a solid middle ranking palette. All right, and then next up is the second full-size Pat McGrath palette I ever purchased, and I purchased this one maybe like a week or 2 after I purchased Divine Rose 1. I was like, okay, I know I like these palettes. And this color story, I remember just kind of going, and the thing that was throwing me off was the one purple shade in here. I didn't understand it until, of course, I thought about the theme and the color, the inspiration, and then it made sense. So their third palette in the ranking, rather, is Midnight Sun. This one here, this baby here. This palette stole my heart. It stole my heart. It's so pretty. And the purple makes perfect sense when you think about the fact that it's supposed to be a midnight sun and those like whiffs of purple throughout, and it just makes perfect sense. I don't use that shade very much because it's just not a shade that I'm not inclined to wear. Like if I wear purple, I'm usually wearing like purple mattes. But yeah, it's a beautiful shade. But my personal faves, and I've talked about this palette before, are these shades here. And I'm gonna try and get good swatches of these. I have Pat McGrath sparkles all over my hands. But these three shades, Vermilion Venom. I always forget what this one's called. I'm not good with the names of them because she doesn't have them printed on the palette. She has those little card inserts, and they're always they're under the bottom of the palette in the box, and I never look at them. I remember this one because it's just, how can you not? It's iconic, you know? But this is so stunning. These shades, this is like my jam. And look how fall these are. Look how like, I mean, this is, you can just do an eye with these three shades and it would be bomb. So yeah, this is number 3. So you're going, okay, there's only 3 palettes left that Pat McGrath has out. Which 2 could be the final 2? Well, I used to think that if I were to ever get a Pat McGrath palette, and this is before I purchased Divine Rose 1, if I was ever going to get a full-size Mothership, it was going to be Decadence, because something about that color story, something about the tones of those shades just made my heart sing. And so after I had purchased Divine Rose 1 and Midnight Sun, she had come out with the Star Wars collection, and she had re-released Decadence. Now, anyone who remembers that Star Wars launch remembers how utterly chaotic and disappointing and enraging it was. And I was one of those people who did not get a palette because despite being on the site, despite having a palette in my cart, it would not let me check out. And so I lost that palette. And I typed angry messages on Instagram going, what the hell, yo? And because I typed angry messages, I got a DM saying, hey, we're going to do a limited restock for people who missed out. Here's a code. Here's a link. And I said, thank you, Mother Pat. I will take said code and said a link. And so that is how I was able to acquire this baby. Now, she since came out with this packaging that's just gold without the Star Wars emblem on it. And I was kind of sad. I was kind of a little bit salty because I was like, I would have just bought that one. I'm not into Star Wars. I just wanted the gold packaging and I wanted the palette itself. But I'm happy to have it because it's a beautiful palette inside and out. And this is the color story. And I know for a lot of people, this palette is not their jam because it's all metallics. There are no special shades in this palette. They're all metallics, but they're Pat McGrath metallics. And Pat has one of my favorite metallic formulas. And this may be a controversial statement. I actually prefer her metallics to her special shades. I know. Don't be mad. It's just how I feel. I'm speaking my truth. Once again, I'm speaking my truth. This is a video of me speaking my truth about my Pat McGrath palettes. I love her metallic formula. And the reason why I love her metallic formula is that it is such a versatile formula. You can apply it dry and you'll get a lot of payoff. It'll be sparkly beautiful. You can apply them wet, amped it up to 10, but you can also take a brush, little fluffier brush, dip in and just smoke it out, blend it out, and you will get this insanely beautiful satin finish. This palette, I can use one shade in this palette, use it on my entire lid, and it will look like I have 2 or 3 shades on. And it's a beautiful formula. But yeah, this was my favorite. This was my number 1, my ride or die for such a long time. And my favorite favorite way of using this palette was to pair it with the Melt Cosmetics Morte palette because, and I'm going to just show you these shades here. These two shades, this red and this blue, together with that palette, I mean, this shade here, I mean, look at that. And she actually has this shade. Decadence, a lot of these shades reappear. They kind of pop up in other palettes. I know that this one is my favorite shade in this palette besides the blue. This has popped up in one of the quads, and I think it's Iconic Illumination, which I think was one of the quads from last year's holiday collection, and I have that palette. But yeah, this is one of the shades that's in that, and it's just, I mean, it's a stunning palette. And I say if you love metallics, or if you're just looking for a really high quality companion palette, this is beautiful, utterly beautiful. And again, it used to be my number one because the shades were just so stunning and so easy to work with, but it has been knocked from the number one spot by another palette. Let's talk about my clownery for a moment. Like I've said before, talk a lot of shit about makeup. I talk a lot of shit about palettes specifically. And oftentimes what will happen is I will see a palette and I will go, that's ugly, or that's boring. Why does that exist? And that'll be my opinion for, you know, a little while. But then I'll keep seeing it. And I'll go, maybe it's not as ugly as I thought it was. Actually, it's kind of pretty. Maybe I should buy it. This is the dialogue that happens all the time with me. And I accept my own clownery. I recognize it for what it is. I do not judge myself for it. It's just my process when it comes to purchasing makeup. So with that said, with that little monologue completed, I will introduce you to the number one palette in my Pat McGrath ranking. Pat McGrath Mothership, excuse me, because there's a ton of palettes. My Mothership ranking. And that is Subliminal. I talked a lot of shit about this palette. Like a lot. I was like, this is so boring. Like, it's so boring. It just has a blue in it and it's so boring. And then last year, Pat had her huge 30% off sale. We were in lockdown and I, like millions of other people, were shopping to entertain myself. I don't recommend that. It's not a healthy habit, but that's what I was doing. And I was buying a lot of Pat McGrath. A lot of these palettes were purchased within a very like short time frame. This one, I just threw in the cart and I was like, you know what? It's calling to me at this moment and I'm going to answer the call. And I'm glad I did because this palette, it's so pretty. It's so pretty. It's the palette that when I think of, you know, when you have palettes that you go, that's one, this palette is one of those palettes for me. I mean, let me wipe off my dirty hands so I can swatch these properly because they need to be seen in all their glory. This palette for me is a go-to. It's a go-to. I have used it so much. I love it so much. Her special shades in this are just, and again, her special shades are not my favorite Pat McGrath formula. The metallics are, but the special shades in this palette specifically are my favorite of all of them because they just, I mean, this pinky duochrome, these, I mean, they're just so pretty. And even the boring part of this palette, and I'm gonna say, like, this is the other half of that palette and it can look quite boring. But it's what I like to think of it as, it's like she's just created this really amazing, strong foundation for these special shades. Because these special shades are so special, I don't think they need a whole lot. You know, they don't need a whole lot else going on. And so she gives you really basic cool tone neutrals, and then she gives you 3 of her satins as well that can help support the look. And these are stunning, and I have no complaints about these bad boys. This one here I love. It's just like a cool tone grayish taupey shade. Then you have this pretty like lavenderish, and then this really soft satiny like champagne tone. So you have, this palette is actually, I would say, along with Divine Rose 1, a palette I would recommend if you're looking for an everyday palette. But not only is it an everyday palette, you know, you can use just these shades and have a look, and then bump it up with that for special occasions. Like this palette is actually surprisingly very versatile, and it has wormed its way into my heart. And when I was doing my ranking, I sat down to write the list, and I knew this was #1, and which was hard for me because this had always been my #1. And I was like, I don't think it is anymore though. I really think it's this one because I love it. I actually used it for a look that I posted on Instagram last week, and I love her. #1 in my heart. That is my ranking of my motherships. I have a ton of her quads. I own most of them except for, I think, one or two of the holiday ones. Was it a holiday one? No, it was one that she released. It was like the Rose, the Divine Rose quad. She's been doing a ton of Divine Rose stuff, and I'm starting to lose track at this point. But I own most of her quads. I own all of her 6 pans. So if you would like to see me do rankings of those, I'll do separate rankings for both. Let me know in the comments. And also let me know in the comments what's your favorite Pat McGrath palette. And if you haven't tried Pat McGrath before, what palette do you have your eye on? I will see you in the next video. Bye.